Spacewalking is really a neat thing, and it's kind of the highlight of one's career, and I was really lucky I got to do 4 of them, and one of them was the longest in history. It was 8 hours and 56 minutes. There are hundreds and hundreds of people in our space program who work with their counterparts in other parts of the world, with the European Space Agency, with the Russian Space Agency, Canadian Space Agency. We've even had dealings with the Chinese National Space Agency that helps us to understand other people better and to work better together, maybe to work peacefully together.
Welcome back to Go for Launch, everybody. I'm MacKenzie, and I'm with Audrey and Cam today, and we have a very, very special guest, my former professor and former NASA astronaut, Colonel Jim Voss. Welcome, Colonel Voss.
Well, thank you, MacKenzie. Happy to be here today and talk to you and Cam and Audrey.
It's really exciting to have you on the show. You're going to be our first astronaut, and hopefully it opens the door to even more astronauts and space-involved people. But just to get right into it, can you just introduce yourself to our audience and describe your background and what you currently do?
Sure. My name is Jim Voss. I served in the Army for a very long time, a full career there. And during that career, I got selected to be a NASA astronaut. And so I served for about 20 years working at NASA, first as an engineer, and then as an astronaut, and then later as a manager. And I did a lot during my NASA career, most of it surrounding human spaceflight. I got to fly on the space shuttle 5 times. I was really lucky I got there at a time when we were flying fairly frequently. And my last flight took me to the International Space Station, where I lived and worked for 6 months with my 2 crewmates and a variety of other people who came up to visit and bring other things up because we were building the space station at the time. So we did a lot of work for outfitting and activating systems and getting it ready to do all the science that it does today. And after my astronaut career, I worked as a manager at NASA for a little while. Then I went to industry and worked with several companies who were working to build human spacecraft for our nation's space program. And then I decided that I'd rather teach. So I went back to teaching at the University of Colorado. I taught at the U.S. Military Academy for a while. I taught at Auburn University for a while right after I retired from NASA. And then I've been teaching at the University of Colorado for the last 15 years about humans living and working in space.
Just to bring up our personal connection a little bit, Colonel Voss, I was one of the very lucky students that finally got into his class, Intro to Human Spaceflight, probably one of the most interesting courses I've ever been a part of. And in preparation, Colonel Voss, because I know how important all of this stuff was to you, I actually have every single question and answer to the very first quiz you give us on day 1 of class, and all of the fun facts about space.
Well, that's good. And thank you for saying that, MacKenzie. I enjoy teaching that class, and it's a lot of fun, and it usually is pretty full. But it's been a joy to teach it and to share my experiences with a lot of young people over the years. And I'm glad that you enjoyed the class and hope that it benefited you in some way, at least in knowing a little bit more about the way humans live and work in space. It's a fun class to teach. And I know that people really like it because it's easy. Most people make an A.
I was going to say it was easy until you brought up that final project. That was a little difficult, but that's because I'm no engineer.
No, that's okay. You did well. Everybody did well on it.
I'm sure MacKenzie benefited from that class, and now we're benefiting too because we all get to meet you and we get to chat with you and bring your perspective to our audience. And one of the things I'm curious about is, given your long and decorated career in aerospace and space exploration, I'm wondering what are some of the biggest changes you've seen, both in space exploration and in the path to becoming an astronaut, and what students today have to look forward to as they're starting off their careers in space exploration and the roles that support it.
Okay, well, yeah, Audrey, there's a lot of stuff that's been changing in spaceflight the last 10 to 15 years. It's been changing drastically. Part of that is because some commercial companies have gotten more involved with our nation's space program, and that was a focused effort by NASA to do part of their role, and that role is to develop commercial industry in space. So they have tried really hard to do that. They started off with issuing contracts for people to deliver cargo to the International Space Station. And several companies took up that challenge. They figured out ways to do it. Currently, today, SpaceX and Northrop Grumman deliver cargo to the International Space Station. So NASA doesn't have to do that. It's like a UPS or DHL to the International Space Station, and they just deliver things and get paid for it. So they have got a commercial business going, delivering cargo to space. Since then, and after proving that commercial companies could do this, NASA then went a step further and asked for commercial companies to develop spacecraft that could take humans to space so NASA could get out of that business. You know, our nation's space program should be doing bold and adventurous things that really challenge us and make our science and engineering communities uh, do really great things for our country and not just do the routine things. And going to low Earth orbit was getting to be kind of routine, still hazardous and dangerous and hard to do, but it wasn't something that needed to be learned. So NASA wanted to turn that over to commercial companies, and they did. Companies competed, won the contracts, developed spacecraft, and today SpaceX delivers astronauts to the International Space Station on a routine basis. And just as a side note, they have expanded into delivering people to space for private missions because people who can afford it are taking advantage of that. And then the Boeing company has developed a spacecraft to deliver crew to the space station. They've done that once, but they had some problems, so they're fixing those things, and they will continue delivering and returning people next time from the International Space Station. So it's really the commercial world that has changed dramatically. It's getting commercial companies to really start investing in doing things in space, and that will just grow and grow over time. It's sort of like the airplane industry was at first. Just a few people flew. Then they figured out they could make money doing it, and it's expanded to the commercial airlines that we have today that are kind of routine and everybody takes advantage of it. And the same thing has been and will continue to happen in space. And that's probably the biggest deal. I think the second part of the question was about astronaut selection. You know, that's been kind of the same for a long time. After the first guys were people were selected back in the late 50s, they changed somewhat, and it stayed the same since probably the mid 60s with how they select astronauts. And they go through a fairly rigorous interview process and to select the people that they want. And that hasn't changed a lot. They have wanted to have more engineers and scientists and even school teachers that have applied and become astronauts. They're trying to broaden it a lot. They want good people that can do a lot of good work. They need technical people in some ways because they have a lot of technical things that you have to deal with and understand in flying the spacecraft and servicing them and maintaining them. But the overall qualifications and things like that have not changed significantly, except to broaden it to allow more people to get in, like me. I could not have been one of the early astronauts because my eyes weren't good enough. But they changed those standards. They realized that, hey, if you wear glasses, you can still do stuff in space. And the changes that they've made have proved to be right. It's opened the door for more people to be in the astronaut corps, and that's I think it's done nothing but make it better because of having a lot more diversity in the astronaut corps itself. And I don't remember what the third part was.
Third part slash a little bit of a follow up on some of the stuff you've just said is what students who are starting to
Yeah.
pursue their careers in space exploration, what might they be able to look forward to? And kind of related to that, and I know a lot of your work has been in NASA, but maybe what some of those opportunities might be like in commercial space exploration.
Sure. I work for three different commercial companies, and
Okay.
I do understand what they were looking for. You know, the space industry is maybe 85 to 90% technical. So having good technical backgrounds whether that is as a scientist or an engineer, someone who studied science or engineering, or a technician. Uh, Probably a huge percentage of the workforce are technicians rather than scientists or engineers. But there are a lot of engineers that they use. But there are other people as well. It takes financial people, business people, all different sorts of folks, public affairs, many different types of people to make a big organization run and run smoothly. So they 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 use a lot of different backgrounds and experiences to run the big organization that does our space program. Same thing with commercial industries. They need a lot of technical people to do the design and the operation of the technical systems, but they also need people in other disciplines as well to do the things that have to be done to make a company operate successfully. And that hasn't changed a lot. It's always been that way and will continue to be that way. And there are a lot of the commercial companies that have been successful now with expanding what the commercial companies do in space that have allowed them to become much larger and to do a lot more hiring. I have a lot of my graduate students in particular who they graduate and go on to work in the human spaceflight industry at Lockheed Martin, uh, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, SpaceX, smaller companies as well that support the space industry. The main thing is for people to do well, because often uh, companies and the government agencies that work in space want really good people who have been successful in whatever they've been doing, whether it's working somewhere or as a student, and they want them to be able to come in and be just as successful working for them. So usually, if someone just excels and does really well at whatever they're doing, it'll help them to get their foot in the door with the aerospace industry.
Well, I personally can't wait to be able to go out in space and live all my sci-fi dreams one day.
Yeah, that's why I did it, Cam.
Be able to do a lot of missions, just like all the movies I've been watching ever since I was a little kid. And speaking of missions,
Mhm.
I know as a former astronaut yourself, and going to doing different things within the military and things of that sort. You sure have like a lot of tasks and as well as a lot of missions, I bet. Out of the 5 missions you were a part of, including 163 days aboard ISS, is there any specific experience or lesson that stands out vividly in your memory by any chance?
Oh my, Cam, that's a pretty difficult question to answer because there were so many different wonderful experiences. Space is a unique place, and things are just different there. So you experience things differently. Even something simple as eating a meal can be an adventure sometimes with things floating and just the different way you have to approach doing simple, normal, everyday tasks. And yes, there were some things that were extra spectacular. I hope I talked about some of them in class, MacKenzie, but some of the things that were just the highlight of one's career, going out on a spacewalk. Well, starting from the beginning, the very first time I launched on a space shuttle. Wow, pretty exciting. The culmination of a lot of years of work and preparation and anticipation, and then getting to actually do it. And it's it's a continuous spectrum of experiences from all the training and preparation that you do, which is, that's interesting and exciting in many ways, and that's your job. And then when you get assigned to a flight and you're working with a group of people that become really close friends, and you work closely with them to make the mission successful. And that's your crew as well as all the other people that are supporting the flights. And then going down to look at the space shuttle and then to get ready to go inside and suiting up and climbing inside. Those are all really special experiences. I mean, you're almost flooded with so many different things that are new, unique, and different. And then the launch itself, the forces that you feel, the vibration, the acceleration, all those things are very special. Then when you get to space, it's sort of the other direction. You're offloaded with all that force and acceleration, and you're floating. And then you start experiencing all the uniqueness about space, floating, being able to move really big, heavy things around. And almost everything you do for a while is a new experience. On my shuttle flights, they were usually, 7 to 10 days long. And you were always discovering new things and having new experiences and learning new things and seeing things in a different perspective. Oh gosh, looking back at the Earth and different parts of it. Uh, s- no one experience, but just hundreds and hundreds of them that were very special. And then living on the International Space Station, all those things then become almost routine, and that's kind of a unique experience itself. Hey, I'm just getting up to go floating off to work and doing the normal things I do every day, moving, 1,000-pound objects around and doing science and putting on a spacesuit and going outside. And the uniqueness of that is that it becomes not so unique anymore. It becomes really learning how to live like a space person. So I can't say there are any things that are the most standout, but of course, things like the launch, doing spacewalks, things like that are very, very special. Having visitors come up and visit you when you're living in space, the entry and experiencing all of that, coming back again, the way your physical changes to your body that you have to accommodate, both going and coming back. So many different things. I don't I don't know how to describe it personally. There's just so many different things. I could talk about any one of those for some time. But I guess you get the idea. There are a lot of really cool experiences that go into space.
I bet the training process was kind of intense in comparison to like, being an athlete, like a football player and everything. Cause like you said, you have to wear like, this heavy set suit and then you have to prepare for the actual launch sequence and then the launch itself in real time. What was the training process like and what were the requirements and how long did it even take to just get fully prepared for it?
Well, you're right. There's an awful lot of training that goes into it, years worth of training. If you can imagine, it's sort of like going back to college again. You do years of classes and training and practical exercises and simulators, and there's just so much to it. And you have to be familiar with the vast majority of it. You've got to be really good at some of it, handling emergencies and things like that, and the things that you're going to be doing in space. So there's just an awful lot to be prepared for. And it occurs over a number of years. They start out with a couple of years now of what they call astronaut candidate training, where they teach them all different kinds of things, a lot of different sciences that relate to space, planetary geology, uh, astrodynamics, all the different things that are background that bring people sort of up to the same level from a science and engineering perspective. And then there's all the systems on the spacecraft that you would be flying on. There's all the experiments that will be done, the specialty activities like robotics, where you operate a robotic arm, or spacewalks, where you have to know your suit and be able to operate and practice in the suit a lot. Flying the spacecraft, and that requires a lot of different things. It's the things you do during the launch, rendezvous and docking with other spacecraft, returning, uh, entry. There's just so many different things, and it's overwhelming. When we were training for the International Space Station, my crewmates and I had trained for uh, about 2 years continuously, and we still had 2,000 hours of training that we never got to, that they wanted us to do. Some of it was stuff that we thought, well, I really don't need training on that, or I did that in my last shuttle flight, so I don't need to repeat that. But they really wanted us to do all that, the extra training as well, but we just didn't physically have time to do it. And I don't know the exact number of hours now of training for an International Space Station flight, but you take a well-trained astronaut already, assign him to a space station flight, and it's still several thousand hours of training, which is, a year or more of full-time work to prepare for a specific flight. So there's an awful lot that you have to do, and most of it's fun. Once in a while, though, it gets a little bit old. I got assigned to a flight to go back to the to go up to the space station to do some repair work before people were on board. And it was sort of a last minute thing to assign our crew to jump in and go on this flight because they needed things repaired because the space station was deteriorating a little bit before people got there and we needed to do some things. So we got quickly assigned. and they had all this training they wanted us to do, and we just didn't have time. We had 2 months before the flight, so we had to decline things. Like I told them, "I don't need to learn how to use the bathroom again. I've used it 4 times already and in space, so I really do know how to use it." I mean, that 4 flights multiple times, so I didn't need to repeat that training. So we didn't do all the training then, but they still had an awful lot for us to do to prepare for the specific tasks that we would do on that flight.
Yeah, it
And
sounds like there's a lot of. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say one other thing Cam said about it, an analogy was a sports team, and it's a lot like that. And often when I talk to young people and they ask if I was afraid when we launched or had any fears. And I said, I should have, but it's just like being on a sports team. If you practice a lot and really prepare well, the butterflies tend to go away. You may still have them a little bit, but you have confidence that you know all the plays, you know all the things you have to do, you know how you perform at whatever sport it is. So it's an excellent analogy. And we get trained to the peak performance level before we go fly. So it is very, very routine almost by the time you get there. But it is a lot like training on a sports team and getting really good at what you do. Go
I
ahead,
like that
Audrey.
analogy because that's one of the questions I had too. But something else I wanted to ask is given all of these responsibilities it sounds like you have and all of this training you go through, what are some of the key traits and skills that young people starting off their careers can start developing? These people who want to be part of the future of space exploration.
That is that's kind of a difficult thing because there's a variety of skill sets that I think that are good and that NASA recognizes are good. They like people who have I call it operational skills, who are able to do things. Usually, being good with your hands. If you work on machinery or your car or something, you're familiar with tools and kind of physical skill type things are seen as something positive, and they do a lot of that kind of training and teaching them how to use tools and how to do things. But it's also analytical skills, being able to solve problems, to see something, and not a mathematical problem necessarily, but a something has come up that you need to address, and being able to take a logical, systematic approach to solving that problem. They like people who think like that. And the other thing are people who are quite flexible. One day I might be training on spacesuits, and the next day I might be learning how to operate a science experiment that some scientist wants me to operate for him. So I need to learn how to do the switches and mix things together as he wants me to do it and follow directions, be a technician for him. And they like people who are very flexible in the work that they're able to do. One day doing one thing and one day the next, and being able to adapt to the different situations that come up. And that probably translates a little bit to being able to handle pretty adverse negative situations that come up and to calmly approach those sort of things. And I don't know how you get to be like that, but if everything that comes up in your life scares you and worries you and makes you uncomfortable, it may not be good to be an astronaut because there's always stuff that's coming up that's not as planned, and you have to calmly approach that and just go solve the problem. I think those are some of the kind of traits and characteristics that typically make a good astronaut, and ability to get along with people too. You're working in a pretty close environment, doing stressful things sometimes, so you need to be able to get along with folks.
So before I get to what you just mentioned about, getting along with everybody and stuff, I do have a follow up on something that you've mentioned a couple times, and it might even be able to give you a second to brag a little bit. You've mentioned EVAs. I know from class that is an extravehicular activity, but for those that aren't familiar with the specific jargon, it's also known as a spacewalk. Colonel Voss, if I remember correctly, you held the record for the longest one of those, right? How did you stay calm during that?
We were just busy all the time. Yeah, spacewalking is really a neat thing, and it's kind of a highlight of one's career, and I was really lucky I got to do 4 of them, and one of them was the longest in history. It was 8 hours and 56 minutes. Recently, the Chinese reported that they had done one that was 9 hours and 6 minutes, I think, and I think they kind of wanted to set the record, but they were doing productive work outside when they were doing it. I don't know if that's all been confirmed yet, but probably it's true. That's a very long time to stay in a spacesuit. Usually we plan for about 6 hours, and there have been a bunch that have gone to 7 hours and even longer. But I think we'd only had one other one over 8 hours before, and it was about 8.5 hours. The thing is, we were so busy and we were doing things constantly that we didn't had no idea how long we'd been outside. Normally, the suit's only designed to go 8 hours, and more than that is kind of an anomaly. It's not normal. You have a material in the suit, in the backpack, that absorbs carbon dioxide. Once it has filled with all the carbon dioxide that it can absorb, you have to go inside, or the carbon dioxide builds up in your suit, and that can be harmful. It can cause you to faint. It could kill you in the long run. So when the suit it has absorbed all the carbon dioxide it can that we normally breathe out, um, you have to terminate your spacewalk and go inside. And I don't know why we didn't use up our capacity for absorbing carbon dioxide, but we just kept on working. We had things to do. They probably wouldn't have kept us out that long because they were watching, I know. But they were moving a module around that we had to do a few things after they got it moved. And it just took a long time to move it around. We went back into the airlock and replenished our oxygen and water. We use water for cooling in the suit. And of course, we need the oxygen to breathe. So we went back inside, we plugged in, got more oxygen and water, and then we went back out and did some more work. But you just don't know. I had no idea. If I had known how long it was, I would have waited 4 more minutes. So instead of saying I did the longest spacewalk, it was 8 hours and 56 minutes, I could have just said, yeah, 9 hours. It would have been a lot easier to say.
Well, do you have a similar sentiment for the fact that you also hold the record for the shortest spacewalk at 19 minutes?
Yeah, that was an unusual one. We were doing it was in a Russian spacesuit, which to me was terribly interesting to get to do a spacewalk in a Russian spacesuit. And all we had to do was go into a node, a kind of a spherical part of the space station that's all closed off, and we evacuated it so that it was a vacuum. Then we removed a cover to expose that particular hole in this module so that we could then put a docking port into it. So we removed a cover, put the docking port in place, and that was all we had to do, which could have probably taken 5 minutes, but we couldn't get the cover off. It was stuck on. And we pried and pulled, and then we used some tools to kind of pry it, and finally got it free and moved it out of the way, and then we're able to put the docking port in place. And then my crewmate, whose name was Yuri Usachev, Yuri and I had decided that we weren't going to do a spacewalk and not go outside. So we took turns sticking our bodies up out of the hatch that we removed the cover from to look around. And I went up and looked around a little bit, and I was going to just enjoy the view. And it got dark because, as you go around the Earth, half the time you're in the sunlight, half the time you're in the shade or darkness. And we went into the darkness and I couldn't see anything, and the lights were bad on the Russian helmet. And so I just said, oh, well, that's enough of this. And I went back inside, and he popped his head out and came back in. So we probably could have finished in less than 19 minutes. But that's the total time it took us to do this spacewalk. And it at least I still have the record for the shortest one where we did the entire spacewalk. I think they had one where someone was going to go outside, they depressurized, but had a problem and just repressurized. So they never went out and did anything. That didn't take very long, but it wasn't a real spacewalk. So ours was the shortest that accomplished everything we were supposed to, plus a few extra little things.
Awesome. And then to get back to the other question that I was going to talk about, working with other people, assuming that you mentioned Yuri, you guys were on a Russian spacecraft. So you've worked with astronauts very closely from all over the world, many different countries, even during your time on the International Space Station. What kind of things did you learn from those collaborative experiences? And why do you think this kind of international collaboration is so important for science and innovation?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the international cooperation, working with people from different cultures, different ideas, different backgrounds. I spent a lot of time with Russians, and I know that we've got our difficulties today with the Russian government. And I grew up when we were in the Cold War, and it was the United States against the Soviet Union, which is what Russia is the primary remnant of today. And I was somewhat, uh, uh, s- I guess, startled that we were working so closely with them when we first started working with them. But I was really pleased when I went to Russia and started training. I trained as a backup to go to the Mir space station, the Russian space station. I really got close to a lot of Russian astronauts and trainers and other people that I met over there, and then found out that what I learned culturally was they're just regular old people like we are. They have different thoughts and they have desires and fears, and but we're all pretty much the same. And it was almost eye opening for me after many years of fearing and disliking those people that I really didn't know, and it was pretty eye opening to me. The beauty of international programs like the International Space Station is seeing a variety of different cultures. I have really close friends now that I either train with or worked in space with from Italy, Sweden, France, Germany, Italy, uh, Canada, South America. It's just amazing the variety of people that you learn to work with and figure out their their cultures and the differences among us and the goodness and badness that's associated with that, and the ability to learn to work with other people because we are a little bit different. And just learning that we're very much alike, but we're a little bit different, and learning to work together with different people, different cultures, different languages. Shoot, I sometimes would speak Russian with someone because we didn't speak each other's language. They didn't speak English and I didn't speak their language, but we both spoke Russian, so we would communicate in Russian. And it has, I think, been beneficial to the world to have people work together in programs like this to help us to understand other cultures. And it's not just astronauts who are working together with other astronauts. There are hundreds and hundreds of people in our space program who work with their counterparts in other parts of the world, with the European Space Agency, with the Russian Space Agency, Canadian Space Agency. We've even had dealings with the Chinese National Space Agency that helps us to understand other people better and to work better together and maybe to work peacefully together.
Yeah, it sounds like that collaboration and that opportunity and ability to work with other people really, I wouldn't even say change the way you did your work, but is critical to being able to do your work. But I'm wondering if that also had an effect on just you as a human being and in the way that you experience your life.
Well, it certainly did, Audrey, in the way that I interacted with other people of different cultures. Living in the United States, we're a melting pot. We have people with different cultures and all kind of backgrounds, and we learn to do that. But but we always have a lot in common, being Americans, speaking English mostly, and so it's not as hard until you run into people who really do approach things differently and who can't communicate with you or you can't communicate with them as well as you normally would. And you learn to adjust, you learn to interact a little bit differently and maybe a little bit better. You're more receptive of differences and you're more cognizant of the differences, the different way that we think about things sometimes. And I think that does help anyone. It changed the way I looked at the rest of the world, I think. And I think I'm a better person. I'm certainly a better person interacting with people with different backgrounds than myself now than I used to be. And I think that's true with most people who are exposed to something like that. And I think that it helps us all to understand that they're not ogres over on the other side of the world, that we should be afraid of and that we should interact with in some arbitrary, forceful way, but we can talk to them and reason with them, and they're good, normal people like we are, and share a lot of the same thoughts. We just have to find the common ground to allow us to interact and work together. And technical programs are really good at that. And there are many more, not just space, but other ways that our governments have learned to work together that I think helps us when we get to the political things as well and helps us to interact better.
Yeah, it seems like a great skill to be able to carry with you throughout life. And what about going to space in general, just being up there, being away from home or doing what you do? How has that impacted you as a person? Has it
Well,
changed the way you experience life or the way you see things?
I don't think so. It's just a little different perspective when you're there. Things are different. You feel things differently, and there's a lot of different things. Some people talk about the overview effect of looking back at the Earth, and when I look back at the Earth, I think, gosh, how pretty that is and how beautiful. It's like being on top of a mountain looking down, but it's just a little higher. It's a different perspective. And so I think I benefit from it, but it didn't change my view of the world. I think I still feel pretty much the same about most things like that. But just doing something that was difficult, challenging, interesting all the time, fulfilling in many ways. It was a very rewarding thing for me to get to do. And like I mentioned before, I've always liked doing different things and adventuresome things, and space is just one more step beyond the normal things with doing something that's new, interesting, and adventurous.
As we move closer to returning to the moon and possibly sending humans to Mars and possibly even have, a Super Bowl at the moon one day,
Mhm.
no jokes aside, what excites you most about the future of space exploration? And how can students prepare to be a part of that next chapter in human history?
Well, we are doing a lot of exciting things right now. Our nation's space program has the Artemis program, which is our official, sponsored by the administration, next steps in space, which right now involves going back to the moon, establishing a permanent presence there that we can go back to fairly frequently. They call it a sustainable presence there. And then going on to Mars, once we have reaffirmed the things that we used to know and need to relearn or make sure our new technologies are going to be appropriate for doing things we want to do on the moon, learn some things about working on a planetary surface. We can start there at the moon and do that, and then go on to do it on Mars. We can ensure that all the tools that we need to go, the spacecraft, the habitats, the rovers, all the mechanical systems and things that we need to go and live there are in place, and we really have confidence in them. And when we start going to Mars, and one of the reasons that NASA is not going directly there is to use the lunar area as a proving ground to make sure that we have relearned all the skills we need, honed everything to just about perfection before we go on a really long, long flight to another planet where we won't be able to get back or get help from the Earth very easily. And we will be kind of independent of the Earth. And they need to build confidence for that. So going back to the moon will help us to do that. And there's a lot of exciting things going on with that, with the development of the spacecraft to land on the moon, to get us there, the things we do on the surface, the science that we'll do there, trying to get resources from the lunar surface, rovers, new spacesuits. All these things are really exciting and interesting, and they're places that young people who are just about to start off to work in industry somewhere can look forward to participating and working in these areas. I have, I think, five students who are working at Northrop Grumman on the HALO module. It's the Habitation and Logistics Outpost that will be part of the Gateway, our small space station that will go around the moon, that we'll go to before we go to the surface of the moon in later flights as part of the Artemis program. And they're just really having a good time working on this new stuff. it's got to be a habitat for people to live in. It's got to have all the things to keep them alive and well and healthy and to operate when they're not there. So, a really interesting work that young people are getting to do, and many more things like that to look forward to. So, I'm excited about it. I think other people certainly who are about to go off and work in the industry certainly should be. I get excited just reading about it, and if they're going to get to work in it, it's particularly stimulating and interesting, I think. So I think that's what I find the most interesting about space right now is all the new things that we're getting ready to go do. You know, if it were up to me, I'd just go straight to Mars because I know we could do it, but it would be higher risk. And as a government program, they really can't afford to take high risk because if things did go wrong, everyone would look at them and say, "Why did you take that much risk?" Private companies probably could. They can't afford it necessarily, but they would be willing to take a little bit more risk. But I know that we'll get there, and our incoming administration may change things. They seem to be more enamored with going directly to Mars and not wasting the time and the resources that we need to lower the risk and to give us higher confidence that we'll have success in our first attempts to go to Mars. We'll have to see what happens with that. But in either way we go, we're still going to be doing really exciting, interesting things in space.
It all sounds really exciting. I personally would love to be a part of the next generation that gets to be involved in space exploration and everything. If
Well,
that's as an
MacKenzie,
astronaut, then yay. But yeah,
MacKenzie, you are part of that. All of you are by spreading the word about space and space flight and educating people on what it's like to go to space and maybe exciting people or inspiring them to work in our nation's space program. So you're already there.
I appreciate that. I'm going to take that as a win. Um, and thank you so much for helping us, be able to do that for everybody today. Now, before we get to our big final question, I just want to double check. Is there anything else that you want to take the opportunity to share with our audience or, whether it's in the place of advice or an experience that they should chase, something? Is there anything that you want to take the time to talk about?
Well, I have been very fortunate to get to work in our nation's space program. I think I was lucky to work as a soldier in our nation's army for a while. I was lucky to get to teach at 3 different universities. I was very fortunate to work in industry in 3 different companies trying to build spacecraft for our nation. And I was really, really lucky to work at NASA and to get to go to space and do a lot of things. But it wasn't all luck. There certainly was some luck in that. But I got to go work in our space program before I was a NASA astronaut because it's something I wanted to do, something I worked towards and developed skills to allow me to go work there. And before I got selected as an astronaut, I thought about it several times. Every time I got rejected, actually, I thought about, as an astronaut, I thought about how wonderful it was just to get to work there and to get to do the things that I got to do, working with spaceflight hardware and go sit inside the shuttle and see what it was really like, go help to process it, look at the experiments that were going on board, help to do things to make our nation's space program successful. And I thought, if I never become an astronaut and I don't get to go do these things myself, it's okay because I've gotten to do some really neat, cool things, and I've really enjoyed doing it. And I think maybe that's the thing to leave folks with. If it's good to set really high goals, and my goal was to become an astronaut and to go fly in space. I also had a goal when I was young of playing third base for the New York Yankees, and I never got to do that. Uh, but I still enjoyed playing baseball all the time. I was striving to get good enough to do that. Same thing with becoming an astronaut. I enjoyed all of the stuff to try to get to there, and I was just very fortunate to get to go and do that. But I would have still had a really nice, successful career and a lot of fun and an enjoyable, satisfying career if I had not gotten to do that. And I think that's what people should realize is set these really high goals for themselves and then work hard to get there. And don't expect it to be given to you unless your daddy's a billionaire and can give you a space flight. Otherwise, you usually have to work to get there. And and if you don't get there, but you strive for these really high goals, you'll still get somewhere pretty high, and you'll still have a satisfying life and career and enjoy what you do. Uh, that I mean, that's, something that I think that I learned over a long time, and through ups and downs of my life and my career, I found that striving to do big things is part of the goodness of achieving big things. Now you said you had a big question at the end?
Yes, I do have a big question. This is a question that we get to ask every single one of our guests, and I'm excited to be able to ask you.
Mm.
What is something, whether it's in your field or not, it could be any topic, what is something that you're just really, really curious about, might even keep you up at night?
Mm. Well, these days, the probably the only thing that really keeps me up at night is thinking about the world in general. I've watched a lot over my long lifetime of ups and downs and good times and bad times and a lot of strife in the world. And the thing that I wonder about the most is what makes people do the things they do when they reach a very high level in a political world. And why do they do things that make no sense to me as a human being? Why in the world would you go to war with someone? Why would you do that? What could possibly make you sacrifice a lot of lives that could make something better in the world? I look at things like the Ukraine. I'm pretty sure that the people who are in the middle of all that conflict, that their lives won't be significantly better no matter what happens. If the war was resolved, one side winning or the other right now, the lives of the people there would not be significantly different. I think it would be pretty much the same. And so, what is it that makes the people who make the decisions to do things like that decide to take an aggressive uh, tact and to sacrifice what winds up being sacrificed for the reason that I can't fathom? I don't understand. That has nothing to do with space, but you ask what I think about these days, and I have thought about that pretty often. And I look back at my experience of working with people in our space program and see that, by golly, we can get along, and we really can. And when you know people better and when you work with them for common goals, that all those little things go away. And maybe that's what we need. Maybe we need a world crisis. Maybe we need that asteroid coming towards the Earth, that we've got to solve the problem, and we have to do it as a world. We can't do it separately. Maybe we need some common thing like that to fix it. And that's kind of way out there. But that's the kind of thing I worry about these days. I don't need to worry about the going to space anymore, or helping our space program do things. I'm pretty much retired now, uh, but I think about the things that maybe concern the world. There are a lot of other issues like that too, that, doggone it, we ought to just all get together and work in the same direction, and maybe we would have a better world because of it. But spaceflight, I think, is one area that we all can kind of maybe work separately, but strive towards similar goals. And maybe we'll work together to do something like going to Mars one day, or saving our planet if we ever need to do that.
Absolutely. And I hope everybody listening, takes solace in the fact that if you're thinking about all of these things, so are other people, regardless of age or race or your profession, anything. We are in a time where working together is necessary. And I personally believe that our sky, our space, is one way that we can do that. It's the one thing that every single person throughout all of humanity has gotten to experience together. So if we can actually just look up towards that and work for it together, I think there's bright horizons on the future.
I think that's very true, MacKenzie. And there are going to space is really hard. It's really hard, and it takes a lot of resources and a lot of smart people to be able to do it. And if we're smart enough to do that, I think we're smart enough to solve any problem we have down here on the Earth.
And if Colonel Voss says we're smart, then we must really be smart. It's been
I believe it.
I
yeah,
haven't
we've
taken his
learned
class yet. I probably
we've
will fail
learned
his class.
so much getting to pick your brain today and hearing all the advice you have for our listeners. And I always say for our listeners, but honestly, I take so much away from all these conversations, and that nothing is different here talking with you today. So thank you, Colonel Voss.
Well, thank you,
Thank you so
Audrey.
much.
MacKenzie, Cam, nice to meet all of you, and thanks for taking the time to let me talk about space. Enjoyed it.